Women now drink as much as men, not so much for pleasure, but to cope. Oh, you mean like a lot of men? Oh man, now that you've manned up, now that you're equal, now that you're also losing your life to some soulless corporation, you feel the need to drink more, huh? Funny coincidence, that. Victoria Cooper thought her drinking habits in college were just like everyone else's. Shots at parties, beers while bowling. Sure, she got more refills than some and missed classes while nursing hangovers, but she couldn't have a problem, she thought. Sounds like literally every alcoholic ever. Because of what my picture of alcoholism was, old men who brown bagged it in a parking lot, I thought I was fine, says Cooper, now sober, living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I hope to God this is not true. I hope this is just a joke. I mean, it's NPR, so it's at least half of a joke. Like, the only decent thing they do is that Spacetime show on YouTube. But anyway, this just proves how stupid and easy to manipulate this generation is. Oh, I thought I couldn't be an alcoholic because I'm not some old man brown bagging it in the parking lot. So that common image of who is affected by alcohol disorders echoed throughout pop culture was misleading over a decade ago when Cooper was in college, and it's even less representative today. So we need more examples, like more representation of women destroyed by alcoholism in the media. That's what they're asking for. So for nearly a century, WAMNs have been closing the gender gap in alcohol consumption, binge drinking, and alcohol use disorder. What was previously a 3-to-1 ratio for risky drinking habits in men versus WAMNs is closer to 1-to-1 globally. A current year -5 analysis of several dozen studies suggested. Hey, we've achieved equality in at least one area. That's something to celebrate. And the latest U.S. data from current year -2 show that WAMNs in their teens and early 20s reported drinking and getting drunk at higher rates than their male peers. In some cases, for the first time since researchers began measuring such behavior. Women in general in recent years seem to be wanting to become men. Everything they view as a male habit, like, oh, is this something a man would do? Oh, I need to do that to show how I'm better. And then men are looking at that going, I'll stick to my 2D waifus. So this trend parallels the rise in mental health concerns among young WAMNs, and researchers worry the long-term effects from Corona-chan's pandemic could amplify both patterns. Hey, us introverts have been living in an extrovert hell our whole lives, and we're just told we have to deal with it. Oh, quit being such a loner. Oh, you need to go out more. And now that Corona-chan has turned the world into more of an introvert paradise, the extroverts can't stop whining. Welcome to the club. It's not only that we're seeing WAMNs drinking more, but that they're really being affected by this physically and mentally health-wise, says Don Sugarman, a research psychologist at McLean Hospital in Massachusetts, who has studied addiction in WAMNs. Research shows that WAMNs suffer health consequences of alcohol, liver disease, heart disease, and cancer more quickly than men, and with even lower levels of consumption. No shit. Because a lot of this is based on body mass. If your body can absorb more alcohol, then obviously you're going to be drinking more, right? So I'm sure this study didn't apply to Trigglypuffs. Perhaps most concerning is that the rising gender equality in alcohol use doesn't extend to the recognition or treatment of alcohol disorders, Sugarman says. So even as some WAMNs drink more, they're often less likely to get the help they need. So how is this our fault or our problem? These women have drinking problems and they keep telling themselves they don't. Oh, right, just like men do. So why don't we start forcing more of them into rehab? In Cooper's case, drinking eventually led her to drop out of college at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She moved back home and was soon taking a shot or two of vodka each morning before heading to the office for her finance job, followed by 2 more drinks at lunch. That's something that a guy would get fired for if he got caught drinking at lunch. When she tried to quit on her own, she was quickly pulled back by the disease. Well, that's when I got scared when I tried to not drink and only made it 2 days, says Cooper, now 30. I was drinking for survival, basically. Oh, just like most dudes. Yeah, how are you enjoying that equality, by the way? Remember when your lives used to be so much better and you didn't need to drink to cope? Man, aren't you wishing you didn't throw all that away to become men? Great when you realize it's not all it's cracked up to be, huh? Although the gender gap in alcohol consumption is narrowing among all ages, the reasons differ. For people over 26, women's are increasing their alcohol consumption faster than men. Among teens and young adults, however, there's an overall decline in drinking. The decline is simply slower for women's. That may sound like progress, says Aaron White, a senior scientific advisor of National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, but it may indicate larger underlying issues. We have a real concern that while there might be fewer people drinking, many of those who are drinking might be doing so specifically to try to cope, White says, and that is problematic. Now, research suggests that people who drink to cope as opposed to drinking for pleasure have a higher risk of developing alcohol use disorder. And while every individual's reasons for drinking are different, studies have found that women are more likely to drink to cope than men. Now, in Cooper's teenage years, alcohol helped her overcome social anxiety, she says. Then she was sexually assaulted and a new pattern emerged: drink to deal with trauma. Experience new trauma while drinking, repeat. It's hard to get out of that cycle of shame, drinking, and abuse, Cooper says. Again, welcome to the club. So women are statistically more likely to experience childhood abuse or sexual assault than men. That's bullshit, by the way. They're more likely to report it than men. How many men and boys out there are getting abused and they hide it because they're afraid of like all the teasing they're going to get when they find their school buddies find out they're taking it up the ass, huh? But this is NPR. We can't expect them to do anything right. In recent years, studies have found rates of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and self-Minecrafting are climbing among teenage and young adult women's. That could be driving their alcohol use, White says. But guess what? This is also just achieving equality in a lot of ways, especially self-Minecrafting. Let's just ignore the fact that men still do it way more. And the layers of stress, isolation, and trauma from Corona-chan could make things worse. One study that looked at alcohol's effects on college students early in the pandemic found increased alcohol use among those who reported higher levels of stress and anxiety, and several studies found women are more likely to report rises in drinking during the pandemic, especially if they experienced increased stress. Well, it's such a shame that you voluntarily chose a lifestyle that leads to more stress, huh? So for us to address issues with alcohol, we also need to address these pervasive issues with mental health, White says. They are all related. True. What's more, despite alcohol's temporary calming properties, it can actually increase anxiety and depression, research suggests. Some studies show it may lead to depression more quickly in women than men. Well, yes, because they can't handle as much alcohol. When Jillian Tits, began drinking in graduate school, she found a glass of wine helped her ease stress. But as soon as the glass emptied, her concerns worsened. Within a year, she began drinking daily and couldn't sleep. Anxiety kept her up at night, she says, and she started having self-Minecrafting thoughts. It was only when Teets took a brief reprieve from alcohol she noticed the connection. Suddenly, the self-Minecrafting thoughts stopped. That made the decision to quit really powerful, said Teets 30, who now hosts a podcast called Sober Powered. I knew exactly what alcohol did to me. Hey, it's great that she was able to come to that conclusion herself, actually. So, yeah, more power to her. Until the 90s, most research on alcohol focused on men. Now, as women's approach parity and drinking habits, equality, scientists are uncovering more about the unequal damage that alcohol causes to their bodies. Okay, so women finally achieve equality with men among alcoholics. Women's most affected. That's the gist of this article. The women have generally less body water, which dissolves alcohol, than men of the same weight. That means the same number of drinks leads to them having higher concentrations of alcohol in the blood, and their body tissues are exposed to more alcohol per drink. The result, from less years of alcohol use, women are getting sicker faster, says Sugarman of McLean Hospital. Too bad that we're not allowed to talk about biology anymore, though, because it's just a social construct. This should have been common knowledge. They're at greater risk for hangovers, blackouts, liver disease, alcohol-induced cardiovascular diseases, and certain cancers. One study found alcohol-related visits to the emergency room from current year -15 to current year -7 has increased 70% for women compared to 58% for men. Well, women still have a lot of catching up to do, though, because for men it's still higher. Why don't you mention that? Another paper reported the rate of alcohol-related cirrhosis from current year -12 to current year -6 rose 50% for women compared to 30% for men. But the male rate is still higher. Women are rising faster because they have a longer way to go to reach equality, and they're trying to say that this is a bad thing. Yet, when it comes to prevention and treatment of alcohol-related health issues, that message is not really getting out there, Sugarman says. Fair enough. Send it out equally. As part of a research study, Sugarman and her colleagues gave women struggling with alcohol use information on how alcohol affects women differently from men. Some participants had been in detox 20 times, yet never heard this info, Sugarman said. Research from Sugarman's colleagues found that women with alcohol use disorder had better outcomes when they were in women-only treatment groups, which included a focus on mental health and trauma, as well as indoctrination about gender-specific elements of addiction. I love this. They're admitting that in some cases, it's best to separate people and focus on their unique differences. But how much you want to bet they're going to be accused of being transphobes real quick? And you know, if men said this, that they have better outcomes when they're in male-only groups, they'd be called sexist. So many places in life, men are forced to hold themselves back in the name of equality. But whatever. This is slowly becoming not our problem anymore. Cooper says enrolling in the 90-day residential treatment program in current year -3 drastically changed her own perception on who was affected by addiction. She found herself surrounded by other women in their 20s who also struggled with alcohol and other drugs. It was the first time in a very long time that I had not felt alone, she says. Let me guess, you couldn't relate to men in the same position? Because as this article itself stated, until they saw other women going through this, they just assumed it was, it's just men that this happens to. Couldn't relate at all to men, huh? Now, as a guy, I can see a woman suffering, and as long as it wasn't self-inflicted, I can empathize. I can feel for her. I guess this only goes one way, though. So in current year -2, she returned to UNC Chapel Hill and finished her degree in women's and gender studies. Oh my God. What a fucking waste. Got sober just to get a gender studies degree. Honestly, you would have been better off just staying drunk. Even completing a capstone project on the links among sexual violence, trauma, and addiction. All right. Although Cooper says 12-step programs have helped her stay sober for 3.5 years now, a downside to those efforts is that they are often male-dominated. Indoctrinational materials written by men, advice geared toward men, examples about men. Cooper plans to return to school this fall for a master's degree in social work and with the goal of working to change those gender disparities in the field. All right, you know what? For that, I can respect that. If you think that you need other women to tell you to not be drunk all the time, yeah. If a man tells you it for some reason it's not effective, all right, fine, get into it. I'm sure there's plenty of other women who feel the same way. Could actually be a benefit, I guess. But still, gender studies degree. This woman's probably going to be addicted to alcohol again in a few years when she realizes she has a mountain of debt and a useless degree. So much lost potential, man. Just sad. Oh man, I am so excited to tell you guys right now that finally, after about a year of build-up and shilling, we have launched Blade Devil on Indiegogo, and so far it is doing so well thanks to awesome people like you. If you haven't backed it yet, then please check the links in the description and check out Blade Devil on Indiegogo. You will not be disappointed. Looking forward to seeing you there.